Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Justin Cook, and I'm the Sales Director for Amwins Global Risks. I'm sorry we've kicked off this session a few minutes late. That's down to me, I'm afraid. I had a couple of technical issues, which meant I had to restart my laptop, so I do apologise for that. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to you, and I'm glad that you are here with us today. I'm joined by Andy Neal, Director of Security at Cardinus Risk Management. Andy is a world-leading expert in personal security and to date has advised governments, royal families, major companies and high-profile celebrities in a career spanning in excess of 2 decades across the world. In today's session, we will be covering the protect duty, more commonly known as Martyn's Law, and the preparations that will need to be undertaken by owners and/or operators of public accessible spaces. We hope to leave you with some important takeaways, including what the protect duty actually means, who it will apply to, the impact of the legislation on businesses and what they need to do, and ways in which Cardinus Risk Management can assist. We will be holding a Q&A at the end of the session, so please submit your questions as we go. But at the same time, if you do have questions that you'd like to pose during the presentation, Andy is prepared to answer those as we go along. We want to keep it fairly informal and try and open some discussion and debate as we go through. So please don't be shy as we run through the next 55 minutes or so worth of presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Andy.
Yep, thank you, Justin. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the introduction, Justin. As Justin has said, I run the security at Cardinus Risk Management, and I have a pleasure of talking to you today for, I think we finished tonight at about 1900 hours. Is that correct? We've got about 45, 50 minutes talk, and because of the roles you're in, I'm going to ask you to ask questions as we go along, and we'll answer those questions as we go through the protect duty. It's quite pertinent, this section, actually, what you're on today, because what's coming out of the protect duty is that the insurance services need to know more about counter-terrorism type operations and counter-terrorism risk management methods. So today, this presentation is given to you to give you a bit of an awareness about the counter-terrorism methods and ideologies, as well as what the protect duty is introduced to reduce those risks. So I'll just shift my screen over. There's me, Andy Neal. I've just completed a master's degree in terrorism, in counter-terrorism operations, and my dissertation reads, can security personnel detect hostile behaviours without the use of technology? And that fits quite nicely within the protect strategy about security resources, etc. But again, this is more of an advisory talk rather than a definite must do. So everything I say is basically advisory and open to any questions that you may have. So it's more of an advisory things to watch out for. But so I'm going to give you a bit of a background as we go through. So the protect duty, the ultimate aim of the protect duty is to create a consistent and proportionate process for enhancing security across any place or space to which the public have access. It's also known as Martyn's Law. As you can see a picture of Martyn here, who was killed in the Manchester Arena bombings, and they've generated this law in his memory. So it's quite impactful and you know, obviously a testament to him and the other victims of the Manchester bombings, which we're all aware of. And again, we highlight this as, are you prepared? The first thing we're going to go through is 5 key requirements that the Act is looking at, the Duty Act. The first one is to engage freely with available counter-terrorism training and advice and training. I'm going to refer you to the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office, where most of you are involved with any training or anything like that. They have some award-winning e-learning programs which are free to look at, the SCAN programs and the ACT programs. So very important that we start to get everybody up together with an understanding of what to look for. I mean, you've all been in situations before where things haven't felt quite right. And again, the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office have some award-winning e-learnings for you to direct your teams to, or your employees to get them up together with the training models, if you like, for counter-terrorism operations. The second part is to conduct vulnerability assessments of operating spaces and places. Now, the estimation is that what will be affected by this legislation is around 650,000 premises will be affected by this legislation. And at present, the government only issues 2% of direct assessments and information to 2% of those 650,000 premises. So as an insurer or as a risk manager, then this should be on your radar or ready to come up onto your radar in preparation and planning. So again, we go back to the referral, back to the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office that has all of the information you may need via its colleague with the CPNI, Centre for Protection and National Infrastructure, who gives some great advice and guidance. So those of you who are looking to advise your clients, please direct them in that direction. Again, no consultancy can compare with the government on their advice and guidance. And I guess it would be quite pertinent to look at who is affected by the Protect strategy. The third model is to mitigate the risks by these vulnerabilities. So from an insurance perspective, what we're looking at is, after an assessment is done, what measures need to be implemented to actually reduce those risks. Okay, and I'm going to give you a little scale later on in the presentation to have a look at. I mean, what risks are involved, and everybody looks at explosions, IEDs, gun attacks, but as we've seen in London and Paris and Istanbul and other areas, Tunisia, we've seen the different methodology by the terrorists as they're operating. So it's pivotal that some of your clients actually mitigate some of those risks and have plans. I would probably ask all of you that most of us are aware of fire evacuation plans. And, if you ask anybody about a fire evacuation plan, they would pretty much tell you what's involved in those plans and their reaction to those plans. As regard to lone wolf attacks and terrorist attacks, if you ask anybody what their procedures are, what their tactics are, you almost get a kind of dumbfounded look sometimes. And this is something we have to actually understand, and again refer to the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office for advice and guidance on that. The fourth aspect is to put in place a counter-terrorism plan. This is a plan for every building out of those 650,000 premises to actually follow what they do in a counter-terrorist attack. What does a plan look like? How is it implemented? And what procedures are used within there? And that's something, again, your colleagues or your clients may well be looking for. As we go through this, you'll see I'll explain a lot of that. The fifth plan is the local authorities to plan accordingly for the threat of terrorism. Now, those of you attached to local authorities, this is kind of almost a red herring, because the local authorities do not generally have plans to the threat of terrorism. They have resilience forums about the after effects of attacks and how to generate risks, etc. So I would ask your clients to pair with the local authority resilience forums to actually start to work out what the procedures the local authorities are looking at and how their plans and their procedures within each location may tie into that. But the local authority will not plan accordingly to the threat of terrorism. They will be more of a resilience. And that's something just to be aware of, but it is within the 5 objectives of this duty. So this is a bit of a historical thing for you. Again, I can't see any of you and I can't hear any of you, so I'm just going to go through on what we call permanent send. So why is the Protect duty necessary? If you look on the picture on the right-hand side, this is Canary Wharf. And terror attacks has changed over the period. All those who can remember the days of the provisional IRA, the target was large infrastructures with large explosive devices. And of course mass devastation and mass destruction. Due to intelligence and different areas of supply, if you like, those type of attacks, e.g. the big IED or explosive device attacks are changing because of the components, and people can't actually obtain the components to actually blow up large infrastructure. And also what's involved in that is networks as well. If you can imagine attacking a large infrastructure within the United Kingdom or any other location, needs a lot of planning, it needs finance, and it needs a whole structure and methodology, which we would term the attack cycle. And actually what's changing now is, if on every attack, because of the intelligence and because of the forensic analysis, then some of those networks can actually be quite if you like, disrupted by law enforcement because of the fingerprint left by the attack itself. So therefore the structure of terrorist attacks has changed, and we all talk about the ideologies and the radicalization, and what the latest method is that people are planning attacks from their bedrooms. They're actually not part of a huge network. They're actually planning the attacks individually in their bedrooms, and they're going to attack in open spaces, as we've seen in the Borough attacks, we've seen in the London Bridge, the Finsbury Mosque attack, which is a right-wing attack where a vehicle was driven into some crowded worshippers. And recently in 2021, we've seen the attack in Liverpool Women's Hospital. So in actual fact, to make explosives and ordnance is quite a skill, but to pick up a kitchen knife and to plan an attack in a busy populated area is not that much of a hard task to organize. So getting the components for large scale attacks like we used to see in the 90s and the 80s is very difficult. And the networks can be compromised because of the forensic analysis from those attacks, and actually the more radicalized attacks now are starting to happen, which is partially why protection duty has come along. It's about making everybody aware of some of the procedures and the policies that you can do to protect your staff and your colleagues or your clients, etc. I'm just going to leave this up here for etc. And this is a public accessible location is defined as any place to which the public or any section of the public has access on payment or otherwise, as of right or by virtue of an express or implied permission. And as it stands, the government went out to consultation with the security industry to actually give the numbers, if you like, for this strategy. So it applies to owners and operators of public accessible venues with a capacity of 100 persons or more. That it should apply to larger organizations employing 250 staff or more that operate at publicly accessible locations, and it should be used to improve security considerations and the outcomes at public spaces. So again, this branches into the 650,000 properties which are affected by this legislation when it arrives. So again, if any of your clients have more than 100 implied permissions, 250 are, you're talking tower blocks where they may have an office with 40 people in, 60 people in, the next office layer up on the next level may have 60, but an accumulation of 250 or more employees will be subject to a counter-terrorism review or an assessment, if you like. What it affects is public venues, including retail, entertainment chains, cinemas, shopping centres, anybody with more than 100 implied guests with an invitation, large venues for entertainment for sports, tourist attractions, and shopping centres. Okay, public spaces such as public parks, beaches, towns, city squares, and pedestrian areas. Now, I'm going to refer to this little kind of graph that we've got at the bottom of the page here. And this is from the National Counter-Terrorism Office, where they're looking at the likelihood of attacks. And as we discussed, vehicle attacks and blunt or bladed weapon attacks, knife attacks, or arson are relatively high on the most likely forms of attacks. IEDs, explosive devices, firearms, particularly rare, in the UK. Obviously, we've seen in the States it's not so rare, but that's down to the firearms legislation. Chemical and biological attacks, very rare. Again, it should be on a radar. And radiological and nuclear attacks. So on a scale of risk assessments, and we can share this presentation with you when we've all finished this. So if you wanted a kind of a scale, most premises would if you ask them to mitigate against chemical and biological, radiological, nuclear, firearms or IED attacks, the severity and the risk of those attacks may be a consideration, but it may be erring towards the higher side of caution, if you like. So let's take an example, Costa Coffee. You know, if Costa Coffee, for example, having to mitigate against firearm attacks and chemical biological attacks, the risk is there, but it's negligible. But certainly if they had a blunted or bladed weapon or a vehicle attack or an arson, then the risk is increased. So they must show as an organization that they've considered those risks and they mitigate against those risks. And I guess for things like public spaces, for village fetes, town shows, etc., they must show that they've got a counter-terrorist assessment and a risk assessment involved with a rogue attack. Large venues, for example, sporting events, tourist attractions and shopping centres. This is definitely on their radar, and if we look at the graph below, they should be mitigating and putting systems in place to actually mitigate those risks, if you like. But it's on a scale of the likelihood. So again, think about that when you're advising any of your clients. Well, I don't usually do this on a program, but because most of the guests here are from brokers, insurance brokers in different aspects, I'm going to ask you to read this. This is from DAC Beechcroft in 2022. I'm going to give you a few minutes to read this so that everybody's through it, and then we'll continue. Probably makes more sense to those in the insurance industry than it does to me. Okay, so again, because of the insurance interest in this talk, that I put that in there just to give you a bit more of an awareness from an insurance point of view, and I'll let Justin answer any questions on this as we go through the program. But I think that's quite relevant and should be of interest to those of you who are on this call. What we're looking at is security enhancements, and again, those of you who have security providers, one of the areas that are of particular interest to me is what we call a terrorist attack cycle. I'm not sure any of you are aware of the terrorist attack cycle. Generally, I work within four stages. The first stage is a reconnaissance, where terrorists actually look for a target to attack. The second phase is where they carry out more implicit, what we call hostile reconnaissance. So they're looking for more detail of what they need. The third phase is they get the logistics and the team, if you like, together. And logistics may be, as we've seen, is it a vehicle-based attack? Is it an attack with knives? Is it an explosive attack? And they gather the ordnance and they coordinate the attack. And the fourth stage, when we worked with Harrods on this, we basically said the fourth stage, you're not going to stop, because basically that's when the attack is actually taking place and they attack the location. There is a fifth stage that people talk about, and that's exploitation and recovery or exiting the scene, if you like. But I prefer to focus on the first four stages. The first two stages of those of you who are advising your clients are when the terrorist networks are at the most vulnerable is when they're doing what we call hostile reconnaissance. So situational awareness is key. If you have security teams working for your clients or you have security personnel, is for them to actually start actively interacting with behavioral detection techniques and methods, if you like, to disrupt the actual terrorist attack plan. And I'm very interested in that. I think a lot of use of technology, facial recognition, it has a place, but I'm a firm believer in going back to what we call human factors and actually educating personnel and staff to read situations and pick up hostile behavior. We've all seen from the Manchester arena how parents actually saw the bomber in lifts and actually highlighted to security that he thought there was a problem. So the situational awareness, again, is key. And again, I refer back to the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office, where there's some great e-learning programs for any of your referrals to go through about looking for behaviors and looking for what we call hostile reconnaissance and mitigation factors. One of the things that should be on your radar to actually advise your clients is what we call support and training. I've put a lovely little picture of a teddy bear here. One of the main conclusions that came out from Manchester is the extension of normal first aid at work or first responders. And we will start to see modules coming out of trauma medicine, bleed control. And so that should be on your radars, certainly when you're advising your clients, that there should be extra modules on trauma management, bleed control of catastrophic bleeds, the use of tourniquets and Celox and different coagulants that stop blood from departing the victims, if you like. So in my opinion, that is one of another layers that's going to be added to the protect duty, that first aid at work will be training, or first responders will be also be given a medical trauma module on top of their normal first aid at work section. So that's something to consider and to look at. Things to consider, again, is guidance. Again, I go back to my reference. If you ask people what they did in any of their work establishments, what they do on a fire evacuation, most of them would be able to tell you some of the tactics and the procedures that their specific company works in, because they go through drills, they go through exercises, and it's known to every employee. The guidance on the protect strategy would be exactly that, is what to do on what we call an in-evacuation. So an in-evacuation is when people lock down, if you like. Again, so we're looking at guidance on what happens in a lockdown system, if you like. So we're not going to evacuate people onto the streets because of obvious reasons. We're going to close buildings down and lock them down. They should also consider the shelter as what we call safe rooms. Where in a building is a safe room, and I'm talking about ballistic capabilities as well. So safe rooms meaning is the walls a partition which offer no real protection against firearms, or is the safe room what type of, they could be there for multiple hours, you know, in a lockdown. So you need to think about emergency grab bags with water in there, and you know, some energy bars and some description, because people may not be released from their safe rooms for a period of time. Okay, so again, think about that is procedures. Has the building got a safe room where all the staff are instructed to go to in the case of a rogue attack? One of the things that comes out from America quite significantly is communication, mass communication. It's a very muddled scene. Chinese whispers is huge in a terrorist attack. Again, so think about mass communication systems between people. I mean, I know people who use WhatsApp groups, but think about the new technology that's out there where every employee who is in a lockdown procedure can get up-to-date communication. We must ensure that that communication comes from a reliable source within the organization. So again, if you're employing security teams, please ensure that they are part of your guidance and your protocols and procedures for communicating towards members of staff that are involved within an attack, God forbid.
Sorry, Andy, are you taking questions at the end, or are we taking questions?
I've got questions up now. So that's good. So what we got, we can operators of public spaces delegate their duties under proposed legislation to a security company. How will appointment of responsibility between these two parties work? Did everybody get that question? Okay, I'll read it again. Can operators? I'll move my mouse around. All right. So the questions come in. Can operators of public spaces delegate their duties under the proposed legislation to a security company? How will the appointment of responsibilities between these two parties work? I think if you've got, that's a really good question, and it's a question we're already raising. I think if you've got a security company looking after an open space or an event, for example, then they very much should be part of the facilities management and the response to that. And that should be shown in the risk assessment. So again, if you've got a security manager involved in facilities management, the ultimate aim, if you like, is for facilities managers to include the security managers in those assessments and in those policies and procedures. Again, everybody needs to know exactly what to do. So if you imagine a sporting event with a safety manager, most stewards, if you like, before the sporting event will go for a briefing, and that's part of their procedures and part of their skills. I see the same again with security managers being intrinsically involved in briefing of the security personnel to actually support the policies and the procedures of the facility. So it's a bit of an open communication, an open procedural plan, if you like. So I hope that answers the questions on that. Ultimately, the responsibility, very similar to the purple guide, responsibility will be on the owners of the building to instigate policies and procedures. Any other questions? Slides will be copied yet. So have we got any other questions? Is there any other questions we can answer?
No other questions in the chat so far, Andy.
Okay. Justin, is there anything you wanted to add in relation to the insurance side of things that I've alluded to or touched on that may be pertinent to some of the teams here?
Not particularly at the moment, Andy, if I'm honest. I mean, obviously it's very early days, and I don't know how far individual insurers have gone into looking at what the impacts are going to be in terms of their wordings and coverages, or how that's going to play out longer term, down the road with potentially, I suppose, events that have occurred because they haven't sort of complied with the legislation. So I think it's very early days at the moment in terms of what individual insurers are thinking at this stage.
Sure. So any other questions at all? I think for me, the three main points are actually, I'm going to go back to it. The three main points for your clients to consider is the guidance, and this is operational guidance. This is practicing and to show that the assessments have been done. The government are very keen not to put too much onus on procurement to premises. So, for example, a good assessment should utilise current security measures and actually tie it into the protect duty rather than loading up with vehicle-based mitigation measures and all expensive door locking mechanisms. So the idea being that is in an assessment that is carried out within a facility is to utilise the current security measures and to match that across for a counter-terrorism procedure, if you like. So that's quite good. Shelter, again, think about the logistical points of a shelter. One thing that I can give advice to you is if there is a terrorist incident and the police are involved with firearms, don't expect to be treated nicely. You see, horrifically, you see people who are in a state of shock, what we call state of shock, and they're wandering around and they don't know what to do, and people are screaming at them to get down on the floor. the police and the emergency services will treat you as a hostile until you're identified as not being part of an attack. So again, about training and a quick talk to people just what to do in a situation where the police or military are involved in an armed response against a terrorist attack, if you like. Yeah.
Andy, with regards to this legislation, what or when is it anticipated that this will actually, become live?
Yeah, and again, I've been holding off on doing talks on this because the CPNI have released a consultation that came out around about March, and because it's in the Queen's speech, some of you may have heard the Queen's speech, there is some kind of, if you like, and I can only just kind of summarize or estimate. It could come out in July, late July, or it could come out next year. We just don't know when the CPNI are going to release the actual guidance on it. So again, this is a proactive talk, if you like, just to sort of make you aware what's coming and what may be coming in the future and what should be on your radar and why it's coming. So yeah, it's a good point. So anytime from July onwards, I would suggest in the next 6 months.
Okay. And do you think, I mean, obviously you in your field, you're obviously, right up to speed in terms of what is coming down the line in terms of legislation and the work that's been done behind the scenes. But, in terms of Joe Public and the people that are operating these spaces, do you think this coming down the pipeline is particularly well known at the moment? Do you think it's been publicised and, people are starting to get to grips with it?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Justin. I think what's happening at the moment within the industry is you're starting to see little bubbles of people looking for information. And again, probably everybody on this call is aware of the legislation coming, and again, I refer back to knowledge base and actually understanding what is coming and starting to prepare now. I think when it does come, it's going to have quite a large impact. So therefore, sort of preparation now is a really good thing. So preparation, being on the radar, and we're starting to see security companies looking for guidance. There's a great question about who has ownership of it, security companies or facilities management. I'm gonna refer back to the Purple Guide, which actually came out of the bombings in Manchester, which is the owners have ultimate responsibility of that premises to implement some of the procedures we discussed today. So I think we're certainly within Cardness, we're ramping up our talks on it. And again, anybody wants any information, please reach out. We'll give you as much information as you need, because Martyn's law is based on the memory of Martyn and his family and all the other victims. And it's not about what consultants know, our skill level. It's about actually putting measures in place which actually stop these attacks. So that's my personal opinion on it, Justin, rather than anything else.
Yeah. Okay. And do obviously, if you're building your capability, is there sort of practical solutions that Cardness are currently offering to organisations?
Yeah, I always work in a methodology what we call a protection triangle. So the people right up the top, tip of the triangle, who have responsibility for procedures and security personnel and employees. Again, we work with them to design policies and procedures. The next level down, we will offer training, but again, there are government agencies, National Counter-Terrorism Security Office, offer a free resource. Again, Justin, we can't compete against that, and we wouldn't compete against it because it's the experts from the government putting out those award-winning e-learning. But what we can design is bespoke programs for people. We can review your security, and we can enhance the security by doing what we call behavioral detection special observation teams, which are designed to actually observe hostile reconnaissance and that disruption pattern we discussed. And then as an advisory method, Cardness will always give advice and guidance along those patterns and steer you through the programs. And actually we can design e-learning for you as well. So lots of measures we can implement.
Excellent. Okay.
I'm not very good at selling stuff, Justin. I'm more of a do our stuff really. So we just get a referral. Yeah.
So we will share obviously details of this presentation, your
Sure.
contact details,
Sure.
following the session today, so that if anybody does have any sort of further questions down the line, or are looking for some support, some practical support or advice, either for themselves or indeed for clients that they look after, that will be available, say, after this call. I don't know. Are we pretty much finished up there? I assume. I don't know if anybody else has got any more questions that they want to pose, either through the chat or through any other means.
Looking at the questions now. Saul, does anybody else any questions from there?
No more questions so far, Andy.
Okay.
Okay.
Like I say, we'll pass out this presentation to you all, and if you want any further information, we can supply you with any information you need to advise your clients and advise your teams you're working with.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Well, look, we've got through that in pretty quick time, to be fair. So, thanks for joining today. I apologise again for the false start, which the responsibility sits with me, I'm afraid, and my tech at this end. So I do apologise for that. But thank you for joining today, and we hope you have a good rest of your afternoon and rest of your week.